So there is weakness. I am concerned that the cooling off in the labor market right now could go cold. I am not concerned that we are at that kind. I think the Sahm rule, the volume's turned up too loud.
A quick note, folks. When I recorded this interview with Claudia a few days ago, her recession indicator, the Sahm Rule, had not yet been triggered. Well, on Friday, it got triggered for the first time since the 2020 COVID crisis, which of course makes this interview with Claudia even more important. Enjoy. Welcome to Thoughtful Money. I'm its founder and your host, Adam Taggart. There's a widely tracked indicator known as the Sahm Rule, which purports to provide an early warning notice when the economy starts entering into recession. So, what's it telling us right now? To find out, we've got the privilege of speaking to its developer, economist Claudia Sahm. In addition to serving as the chief economist for New Century Advisors, Claudia spent many years working at the Federal Reserve, as well as serving on the Council of Economic Advisors to the White House during the Obama administration. Claudia, thanks so much for joining us today.
Great. Thank you for having me.
Hey, it's my pleasure. This is the first time that we've done an interview together, so it's nice to meet you for the first time. Very honored to have you here on the channel. Definitely want to get into the Sahm Rule and what it's telling us right now. Before we do, though, if I can, I'd like to ask you the same general question that I like to kick all these interviews off with, which is, what's your current assessment of the global economy and financial markets?
For me, the economy, where we're at right now, it is really remarkable that we have come to this place. The disruptions that the pandemic kicked off, the disruptions that we saw from the war in Ukraine, these were immense, and we had some really dark visions of where we would be in the summer of 2024. And honestly, it's been very confusing, but we should note that there has been a remarkable amount of progress and we have a lot to build on. So I see a lot to um, really see as good in the economy right now. And though I think we will probably talk a lot about the risks and the uncertainties that lay ahead.
All right, I think that's a very accurate prediction. Your Sahm Rule is going to be one of the indicators. Hopefully, that'll let us know if and when it starts to become time to worry. So I want to talk about that in just a second, but real quick, maybe just to pull the punchline up to the very front here. So I agree with you. We've had, if you look back at the span of the past 4 years, we've just had unbelievable disruptions. I think disruption is a great way to say it. A ton of things that we never saw coming, of massive scale, both in terms of maybe the injuries or the blows that the economy took, right, like shutting down the global economy, right? But also in terms of the response, right, the policy response to that. We saw policy response at a scale that I think nobody could have imagined in 2019, right? And we'll talk about the details of all this, so I'll give you a chance to expound as much as you want. I'm just curious, do you feel on net, did we make it through the storm? And we're oh my gosh, we had all these amazing things, a global pandemic, a shut down the global economy, yet here we are with low unemployment and inflation moderating and all that stuff, right? And smoother sailing-ish is ahead, or is there going to have to be a piper to be paid for the scale of the response to what went on? A thing I talk about in this program a lot is the lag effect, right? And maybe we can talk about that at some point later on here. But there's an argument that some make that there are repercussions traveling through time still that haven't arrived yet, just because it takes a while for them to do so in general, but maybe it takes a long time to fight through all that stimulus that was put out there, and that we may still have to pay the price. Or did we already pay it in 9% inflation that's now moderating down to 3-ish?
We have many lessons to learn from this crisis. It's not the inflation that we lived through, and this was very much a global phenomenon, and we saw across the globe differences in how aggressive the fiscal response was. United States had one of the most as a share of GDP responses. And yet, in general, it was a big response, right? And my monetary policy was generally very supportive early on. So, and yet, we just see a very common the pandemic, what we saw in terms of global supply chains and often in even local labor markets. We saw, the pandemic labor shortages. So I wouldn't say that we have paid the price already. It's that, there are definite concerns about debt sustainability, the path that economies like the United States were on even before the pandemic,
Mhm.
and very much are on now. And what it's that if that's coming to a crisis, it has not yet. And so the idea that if we do fiscal policy, we need to do it more effectively. We need to think about the balance of the spending and the revenues. It's not clear to me that we've come to that reckoning, nor are we outside of sound bites headed for it until we're forced. I mean, those are some difficult conversations. I don't see the response to the pandemic as fundamentally worsening the picture, right? We were on this path, but
Mhm.
yeah, so and yeah, to I think in that spirit, because we are in the deficits relative to GDP are higher, and we've done these big fiscal spending, it may not be next time that we go at it in the same full force. Right. So that's why I said we need to learn the lessons and like really what would have been the most effective use of money, government money uh, in this. But I'm really afraid with these kind of questions, the reckoning will come in a very painful way. Um,
Okay. All right. And like I said, we're going to get a chance to expound on all this stuff. But I take from what I hear you saying, maybe your last line there, right? Which is too early to say we're out of the woods. And, there are reasons to have some concerns that a reckoning, maybe even a painful one, could lie ahead. Of course, we're going to have to, look at the data and make the calls on the ground as we see them. All right. So you've raised a really important question that I'm going to mention, and then I'm going to ask you to talk about the Sahm Rule, and we'll come back to your answer to this question. But the question is, what lessons should we learn from what we just went through? Right? Let's put a pin in that. I just want to make sure that the listeners know I'm not going to ignore that very important question. So let's get to the Sahm Rule, which it's always fun to interview somebody who has an economic rule named after them. Congratulations for that. But if you could, for those that haven't heard it before, maybe have heard it but don't exactly know what it is, if you could just describe what it is, and then maybe tell us what it's indicating right now.
So the origin of the Sahm Rule actually relates back to what we were just talking about with fiscal sustainability, effective fiscal policy. So I worked on a project in 2019, so well before we had heard of COVID, on how to make the government's response to the next recession more effective. And the framing for this was saying about the Great Recession. It was a very slow and painful recovery, government spending, it happened, it wasn't as forceful, then it actually walked back into austerity. Like it just really complicated. And so a volume I participated on, that was the Brookings Institution and the Washington Center for Equitable Growth, had ways to put fiscal policy on autopilot, right? In a thoughtful, responsible way, right? So that you would, under certain conditions, macroeconomic conditions, policies would begin. In my case, it was sending out stimulus checks, like having them well designed, they'd go out automatically. It could be increasing unemployment benefits, but trying to take the politics out of it in the moment. And we
Mhm.
certainly saw that with the checks through the COVID crisis, like the amounts of the checks and how big and when, like it had a lot of politics driving it as opposed to evidence base and really calibrating off of economic conditions. And so what I had proposed was putting stimulus checks on autopilot as soon as a recession began. Now, to do that, you need a trigger. Because again, we want
Mhm.
to take politics out of it. We want to put it on autopilot. We want Congress to agree ahead of time. And so I developed an indicator looking at changes in the unemployment rate, which I I was not the one to invent the dynamics of the US labor market, right? Like it's understood that small increases in the unemployment rate can end up being very bad. There is a dynamic. We have a large labor market. You start getting this very negative cycle of layoffs and consumers cutting back and more layoffs. And so then the unemployment rate will climb. But I spend quite a bit of time with the economic data, really looking at is there a threshold? Like, is there a place that we could say as early as possible we're in a recession, but to say it with high degree of accuracy? So not like a
Mhm.
forecast. Forecasts, they're always, it's okay, they're wrong sometimes, but you want to get really ahead of things. With this, it's saying, no, we're in a recession, send out the checks.
Okay,
So
so this
the
is your
exercise,
economic canary that you're creating here, the thing that we can look
yes,
at early and say, oh, trouble's coming. Yep.
right. And now we can look and see, oh, this is when a recession started, ended, but in real time, it often can take many months, sometimes a year, for a recession to be officially designated,
Yep.
right? So this is just something in real time to say it's bad, we're in a recession, and it's going to get worse. So fiscal policy, if one wanted to do this in terms of extra support automatically, now's the time to do it. Again, it's all in the spirit of trying to make fiscal policy more effective. And
And what I liked
so,
about what you said,
mhm.
less politicized. Now, we have to figure out how to keep the politicians out of it, but at least you're kind of creating
Yeah,
the guidebook that says, hey, if politicians would just be hands off, here's a progression that we could follow based upon, you know, real-time adjustments to what's going on.
right. And it's, the politician would always, it's if fiscal policy is done, it has politics with it. It's trying to take it out of the crisis, get it ahead of when there's time for more deliberation, less hasty decisions, because if you're making decisions in a crisis, all you can do is but make hasty decisions. Right.
Mhm.
So it's trying to kind of change the dynamics of it and get have it be more predictable. People, businesses would know too, and think like that this is that that backstop is there if the economy were to go into a recession. But I put a high bar on accuracy in the the recession indicator, which was later named the Sahm Rule after me, that it has from the 1970s on, it was perfect. And I looked at the data at the time, so like the real-time data, like what would it have looked like? It always turned on. It didn't turn on outside of recessions. A couple times came close, but so it had this perfect since the 70s. You go back in the 60s and 50s, it's almost perfect. The couple of times where it has a false positive, a recession came 3 months later, 6 months later, which for my rule, that's a mistake, right? Because I'm trying to get it in the recession, not a
Mhm.
forecast. It's now I think in the conversation how you interpret this thing, to think about that. But yeah, so that's why it its accuracy and its simplicity. Again, it is meant to be in legislation to do fiscal policy. It needs to be straightforward. It needs to wasn't trying to do something complicated here, but uh yeah, and so it has gotten uh a lot of attention, and particularly now as we're getting closer to, though it has not, but it's getting closer to the half a percentage point trigger.
All right, and all right, I want to dig into that, but real quickly before, can you just, in case I missed it, can you just say exactly what the Sahm rule looks
Oh,
for? Like,
yes.
what is the math behind it? Yep.
Yes, yeah. So first I take the national unemployment rate, the 3 month averages. So I do a 3 month average over time because we don't want to overreact to 1 month's data bumper wiggle, kind
Yep.
of thing. So look at the 3 month average. I take the most recent reading of that 3 month average and I compare it to the lowest reading of the 3 month averages in the prior 12 months. And if your current reading is a half a percentage point or more above that low, then that is consistent historically with being in a recession. And it typically is about 3 months into a recession. So this is not a forecast. if you want to forecast, there are other ways to do this, but like in terms, but so it's early stages of a recession. And it turns out, and if you look just at recessions overall, you have this where the unemployment rate rises gradually-ish going into a recession. It's actually can kind of bump around many recessions since, yes. And then early in a recession, there's rises. That's this half a percentage point is in that mix. And then it tends to really take off. And the mildest recession we've seen would have a 2 percentage point increase in unemployment rate, which would be the 2001. And then obviously we've had some really big ones since then. But yeah, so you
Some big
can,
doozies. Yeah.
yeah.
So I've brought up this chart before many times on this
Mm-hmm.
program to kind of make the point that when the unemployment rate starts to kind of get away from us, right, heading into recession, it tends to go far and fast, right? So unemployment tends to be, declining after a recession. It then enters a very quiescent stage, and everything looks fine. But what's interesting is when it starts to turn due to an oncoming recession, it does tend to turn really fast, which is why an early warning indicator like the Sahm Rule can be really useful, right? I almost sort of liken it to like a tornado warning, right? I just saw the movie Twisters the other day, and it's all about, oh, if we could give people, earlier warnings, right? So I get the sense that that's what you're trying to do here, and I totally understand the importance of it. So you're basically saying, with your formula there, it's not quite yet at 50 basis points above the previous 12 months low, but it sounds like it's getting close and the momentum is still heading towards triggering it. Is that true?
Yes. So it's at 4/10 percentage point or 43
Okay.
basis points. People are being very particular with it. Don't false precision. And it is the case that for a string of months now, we've seen the monthly unemployment rate in the US tick up.
Mhm.
And the and not even just recent months, but again, the Sahm Rule has this over a year. Well, it looks back over a year, but we've seen in the US for about a year and a half-ish, the unemployment rate very gradually drifting up, which is consistent. I mean, like that is a pattern that you would often see heading towards a recession. But where we're at right now with the 4/10 of percentage point increase over the prior year, that is not, there are times where that level has been reached and there has been no recession. That it can, and we would never look back if all of this just, goes to the wayside and unemployment, no one would ever look back and say, oh, a 4/10 percentage point increase in unemployment rate. How awful was that? Right? Like it's not
Yeah.
this, the idea of this is you have these very small increases that, as you said, can, if they build enough, turn into larger increases. The other piece that the Sahm Rule picks up on that's important, I think sometimes in the discussion of the unemployment rate in the US right now gets uh, kind of is missed to some extent, is the Sahm Rule looks at changes in the unemployment rate. It's not the level, right? So right now the
Mhm.
unemployment rate, and we will, I guess, as of June, the unemployment rate is 4.1% in the United States. And that's a very low number historically. And yet it has risen in 4/10 percentage point, which is of some concern because nearing this half a percentage point uh, trigger, because you can look back, it's been quite some time. You have to go back to the 1960s to see unemployment rates that have been the 4%
Right.
low over a period of time. And yet we have gone into recession from lows of 4% on unemployment. Like the level itself is not going to tell you whether you have, a recession brewing or not. It's really about these changes, which makes sense because a recession is about a contraction in economic activity. Right?
Yeah.
This has to do with like the changes in the economy.
Right. And that's how we experience too, where we go from something that feels normal to something that feels worse, right? And it's that change, right? So I'm just curious, a little bit of a wonky question, but
Mhm.
as we enter recession that's accompanied by dramatic spike in unemployment, is the Sahm rule kind of getting triggered multiple times through there because you're kind of blowing past, the past year's low on an ongoing basis?
Yes, you would see if you put up the chart of the Sahm rule, it it has that kind of feature of the peaks to it as well. But it's the idea of it is it's really useful. Its use is in the turning it on
Yes,
as
I
opposed
totally
to
get it. Yeah.
yeah, and it doesn't tell us anything. I did work on some fiscal policy proposals where you had like starting the policy and then automatically stopping or phasing out the policy, which if you have a, in recession program, like extra unemployment benefits, you need to have if you're going to have a trigger on, you should have a trigger off,
Trigger off. Yeah.
right? And the Sahm rule does not have that symmetry, right? To me, there it's anchoring potentially on what was the level of the unemployment rate prior to the recession versus now, or as you're trying to think of the benefits. But there's no like the Sahm rule really is like it's useful on the uh, introduction, the kind of turning on,
Yeah.
and then it doesn't have.
It's really helpful for game on. It's not
Yes, that's
constructed for game off. Yeah.
yeah.
Or game over. Okay. So a couple of things. First off, I want to note that, there are a number of other people out there that have their own sort of variations of recession early warnings, oftentimes using unemployment. I just want to mention one because I had him on the program here not that long ago, is Michael Kantrowitz from Piper Sandler. His rule is that, like you, he uses a 3-month moving average. He says that if the 3-month moving average of unemployment is growing at a rate of 10% year over year or greater, then that's a fairly good predictor. I don't know if it has the same track record as the Sahm rule. When I was interviewing him a couple of weeks ago, we were at 10.6% on that metric. So that one is saying, hey, time to start worrying. I totally get the Sahm rule is not saying that yet.
Mhm,
But I want to note that a little bit sort of like
mhm.
flattery or imitation is the best form of
Yep.
flattery, that other people are trying to riff off your stuff, but also that other people's indicators are beginning to flash. Yeah.
Yeah, no, and I think even when really the idea that this has become a thing just blows me away, and did from the very beginning when the volume came out in 2019, is there we in the kind of discussions we're having right now about where is the economy headed, this kind of big picture outlook, the more tools, the merrier, right? Like we really should be using. I certainly, when I think about where my view of the economy is, I do not just start and stop with the Sahm rule,
Yeah.
right? Like it goes well beyond. And I hopefully get a chance to talk about why I think it's missing some important things right now. This there is a very rich space of tools that have been used in the past to forecast a recession or forecast significant weakening in the labor market, and they tend to. And then there are some that have used changes in the unemployment rate,
Mhm.
right? A very uh, one that has been, I think, used often on Wall Street. Bill Dudley was one when Goldman Sachs used it. The Fed had something kind of similar, kind of a third of a percentage point increase in the unemployment rate. I mean, define different. I gave you my formula, but the
Yeah.
different ways to do this. That had a very high likelihood of then later leading to a recession. So this forecast, like I'm putting a really high bar, right? Like because it's not, I'm saying you've got to be in the recession, and it's got to be, consistent with all these past recessions. Honestly, like 4/10, the chances that a 4/10 ends up into a recession is pretty high, but it's not perfect, right? So that's why it doesn't. So I think the labor market, there certainly are other indicators, many of them, the ones that have any kind of forward looking, have been used typically to predict or forecast, have already triggered. Because again, the
Yeah.
sun was actually one of the stingier ones in terms of its. But one thing that has been really challenging in this cycle with all of the tools that we have is how and I think there are reasons why this is the case. Haven't has been as accurate or have really struggled with some of the situations. So a comparable, because again, the Sahm Rule is like an indicator. An indicator, probably the most famous indicator that we have of recessions would be two consecutive quarterly declines in GDP.
Mhm.
Right. And for a lot of countries, this is, a technical recession. This would be a definition. If we didn't have official dating of recessions. And in the first half of 2022, the United States, for two consecutive quarters, had a decline in real GDP. We had no recession. And these were swings in inventories and contributions from net exports. You have to go back to 1947 in the US to find two quarterly declines in GDP outside of a recession. And we had it in this cycle. So, there have been, whether it's an indicator, we've had forecasts. I mean, there's been a call for a recession. We took a little break early at the beginning of this year, but I mean, basically for 2 years, once inflation had spiked, there was a consensus of a recession. Not
Absolutely.
me. I was looking at the Sahm Rule. I didn't think, given the labor market, we had that, or that we needed it because the COVID-driven inflation. But this has been a really challenging environment for assessing, and yet we have to be very careful about this time is different. It is, but missing early signs of a recession would be very unfortunate when there are policy levers to pull right now.
Okay. You're opening so many doors I want to go through, and I'm
So,
going to try to do my best to have us go through all of them in the remaining time that we have. So if I hear you correctly, I hear you saying, man, it's a challenging, maybe exciting, but challenging time to be an economist because there's a lot of dust in the air, a lot of uncertainty. If I can kind of read your body language and your tone a little bit, it strikes me as, and look, yeah, I'm almost kind of impressed the wheels haven't come off this thing yet, but I'm concerned they still could. You're not making a call, okay? And you're nodding as I'm saying this, just for the folks that can't see you nod.
Yep.
All right, so there are a couple questions I want to ask you before I let you just opine in general on your economic outlook. And one is, what is the level of dependability of the economic data today? And I ask this probably primarily about the jobs data. There's been so much debate recently about how trustworthy the numbers, especially those coming out of the BLS, are. And I've talked to people who talk to the BLS a lot. And look, I'm putting aside, the folks that are saying it's an election year and they're doing everything they can to put lipstick on the pig and all this. Let's put that aside for a moment. I've heard sort of secondhand from these folks that talk to the BLS that COVID and the responses created such dramatic swings in the data set that we're still dealing kind of like with the bullwhip effect repercussions of that. And it kind of blew out their models. And that's why we still even now have a really massive part of the jobs numbers, like the payroll numbers and stuff, that are being calculated via Excel through the birth death model or whatnot. And so, and I know there's also been issues about methodology, and now we're in a time in the country where government's hiring a ton, but private hiring is really drying up, and full-time jobs are suffering, and part-time jobs are going through the roof, and native-born people aren't working as much as immigrants coming in. And so there's just, I think, a lot of dust in the air around these numbers. It's obviously going to make your job harder as an economist, but how much of what you're looking at do you feel confident about versus, there's more wiggle room in these numbers than normal right now?
How confident do I feel? It's the so it's hard. It's hard right now. When we do it, the U.S. economy, the global economy. I mean, these are massively complex, dynamic systems always, right? Like even in the very best of conditions, trying to assess what's happening, they are, it's gonna be tough, right? And it's absolutely an important thing to keep in mind. And really, it's like it's been 4.5 years since the pandemic started, and for I think a lot of people, this wanting, you know, we want to move on, and it's in the past, and but no, this has ongoing echoes, I think, in our lives in general, and it's certainly, and in the economy, like there are echoes in the economy. You can see, say, the inflation. You can still see echoes of COVID disruptions back in 2021. They're working through, and there are also echoes of challenges, disruptions in our statistical systems. Now, I like that's the best we got, right? Because we need these data. To be able to do the work I do, I must have a systematic overview, the best I can get in terms of how things are going. I've also noted, interacting with a lot of individuals in various mediums as a economist, that like people are kind of broken too in terms of their perception. So it's not like I'm
Mhm.
just going to go from statistical data to anecdotes. I need to, I mean, I interact on both levels, but like this has been tough. The place where I feel even more strongly than I did in terms of how to like filter through some of the noise in the data is just be really careful of the high frequency data. Because one of the issues, like say with something as simple as seasonal adjustment, which actually isn't that
Mhm.
simple, but for like people that consume the data as not a, don't produce the data, but consume as, so we just take for granted, they take out the calendar effects. And there were some really fundamental changes in how we behaved as consumers or as businesses. And if we look at every like piece of data and take it at you can really get whipped around. And frankly, I even as someone who does this professionally, will get to the end of the week and feel like I've been whipped around by every data release that
Mhm.
week, because you'll have some positive ones, some negative ones, some positive, and then I'll go to update, some quarterly kind of overview for clients and look at, it's like, oh, well, this story, it's held up. You just have to be careful not to get beaten around by the latest data point, because I think um that's just, in general, there's not as much precision as we would like. We would all like certainty. We would all like to know the answer. We don't have that, and I do think this cycle has really pushed our statistics, our ability to measure things in a consistent way, and so you have to be careful of that. And the other piece of this that does make it very hard, I can be very critical of the Fed and other policymakers, but I do
Mhm.
understand that they're in a tough place. The rules of thumb, the theories, the basic are just have not held up. I mean, if you had, I very critical of, say, the Phillips curve that says there's a trade-off in its simplest form between inflation and unemployment. And yes, back in 2022, if you looked at what was happening, you're like, oh, we're going to need a recession. Or the Fed, oh, we're going to probably have below trend growth to get inflation down. But we didn't. We had above trend growth, decades low unemployment, and inflation came down rapidly starting the middle of last year. So like, what is that? Is that, even though that was a very good outcome, we think, like, what was the cause of it? Where does this go going forward? Was there some big measurement issue that are we just getting completely told the wrong story? So because measurement and theory and like it all has to fit together and tell a story. And I like have, because it's what I do I have my story to tell about the economy, but I have other people who I respect very much, the way they tell a totally different story. And I feel like that, given just how uncertain and how unusual this period has been, is that's, I mean, I'm not sure that we do much better than that.
Okay. you keep opening really great doors. And the one I want to just drive a dump truck through right now is, okay, well then what is your economic outlook? Before we do, just in leaving this topic, I kind of, I mean, I asked it because I sympathize with you that this
Mhm.
is a really tough time, I think, to be doing your job, given all the challenges that we just mentioned. But when it comes to the Sahm Rule specifically, do you worry at all right now that maybe if the data weren't so distorted, maybe it'd be telling us something different?
Yeah, so when I get worried, I go grab data and I poke around in it until I can try and answer some of my own questions. The, an appeal of the Sahm rule and what gets kind of kicked around right now is it has a number, 0.5, right? So
Mhm.
this is like once you cross this, now it's a recession. And so it's like, okay, well, but that was very specifically calibrated. Like I went at the historical experience in the US and found 0.5, right?
Right.
Like that was what I was looking for. And I in fact worked on a project recently for the Treasury of New Zealand. The paper will be out here shortly, where part of that project was to come up with what would be a recession indicator for them. Like if they wanted to at least consider or think about these fiscal rules or automatic stabilizers, and well, their economy is different, right? Like it doesn't, it's more volatile. Like this
Mhm.
is a small open economy, so like really getting in there and trying to be like, well, what is it and what does it even mean? Like, how do you define a recession? Where would you want to like step in? So I already earlier in this year had a much more intimate exposure to it's real. Like there's not some like you're trying to capture a dynamic. You want to simplify it into something, eh, and actually in New Zealand I had to do a multi-step. Like there wasn't, it's not that simple
Yeah.
with their economy. And so then it's like, okay, well let's go look in the US. So I know what the threshold is, but what's happening under the hood? So one of the analyses I did recently was look at the composition of the unemployed and how does it change? Because in the surveys, they ask people, essentially if you're, not employed looking for work, they'll ask, well, what were you doing before this? Right. And there's the three typical group or the three large groups are that you were laid off previously, now you're unemployed, you'd entered the labor force, either as a new entrant or kind of come back to working and you're looking for a job, or you left a job and in the interim you're unemployed looking. Right. So then because again, there's something of this dynamic, this momentum, right, going into a recession. So looking at what happened in the different recessions previously, and probably not surprisingly, but in recessions, typically you start to see a real increase as you approach hitting the Sahm rule, the half a percentage point increase of a shift of the unemployed towards those being laid off.
Mhm.
And then after it triggers, so you're early in the reset, then it really like just takes off. I mean, this makes a lot of sense that it's a demand, it's a weakening, and so currently we do see that, but to a much lesser extent, right? So it's in that process. So there is weakness. I am concerned that the cooling off in the labor market right now could go cold. I am not concerned that we are at that kind. I think the Sahm rule, the volume's turned up too loud in terms of the recession is imminent. Kind of the numbers might look at that way. And what is very unusual, and again, I'm just looking at all these different recessions, kind of what are the patterns? What really sticks out for the current cycle is normally as you go into that early stage of a recession and the Sahm rule triggers, the share of the unemployed who are entrants to the labor force, who've come from the outside, that really drops. As again, why would you come in from the sidelines if it's a bad labor market?
Right.
Right. Like typically a good labor market draws people in. That's this demand. Okay. So normally you have those new entrants actually fall as a share of the unemployed. And right now, unlike any other recession, that has not happened at all. And this is very consistent with this we have labor supply coming in. We've had the immigrants has been one area where like they're coming in looking for jobs, not because this is a great labor market. It's because they're here to get jobs. right? So it doesn't have that. And as it takes time to get a job, that can push up the unemployment rate. So that's not a recession dynamic. It's sitting on top of what is a softening, and so like, because to me, it's like I want to be able to try to roughly quantify it. Like
Yeah.
I felt like, yeah, the immigration that's in there, that's pushing up the, but like that's probably not all of it. Like we are seeing weakness. So that's kind of how I have gone at it. But I've certainly seen other people doing analyses to like tease out or look at other ways to assess labor market changes that might be different.
Okay. I'm going to ask a very specific question. I hesitate to do so because I don't want to derail you from the larger macro wonderfulness you're giving us, but I just feel compelled to ask this question. And this is more on the behavioral side. Like you said, our way of thinking has been changed by the trauma we went through with COVID. And I think with companies, what it convinced them to do was to hoard labor, right? Where they let everybody go. And then all the stimulus came and they said, great, I can hire everybody back. And then people didn't want to come back, or they were only willing to come back under much different terms, more expensive terms to the company, right? So companies generals always fight the last war, right? So they're afraid of laying people off and then needing them again. So in theory, this time you could make the argument they're going to hold on to them longer, which might mean we may have like a flushing out at some point where if things get bad enough, they're like, look, I held on to these guys as long as I could, but now I realize we're going into recession. Let's just dump everybody, right? You're kind of nodding a little bit as I'm talking here. Is this
Yeah,
something you think could be a factor?
absolutely. I mean, you're highlighting my morning argument with myself.
Okay.
Because because I'm trying to this like should we think of this as being a recession could be right around the corner, or is it like, no, there's actually good stuff in here? But the job openings and labor turnover survey, so JOLTS data this morning, showed this tension even more so, like, really widening out in the data. And this is a survey of establishments, so not the data I'm using with unemployment rate, but where you now have it where the hiring rate in the United States is down to 2013, 2014 level. So like early recovery, Great Recession, when the labor market was not good. Right? This is a according to these data, this is a very tough time to find a job, right? And at the same time, the firing rate hit a low for that survey. I mean, it doesn't go back as far. The JOLTS it's back to the 90s or something. And so you have this very, like, if you have a job, you got a job. They are, whether it's hoarding or just like having not that willingness to let go of workers. But if you're trying to find a job, it's a tough time. And that is not typical. So right, it
Right.
could also be, I talked about like immigrants being a source of the new entrants. It could also be that you have employers who have changed their behavior in hiring. Now, I will say for the analysis I was talking about with the laid off for and the composition of the unemployed, the uh it's not the equivalent of the firing rate, but the fraction of those who have been laid off has shown more of an increase than in
Hmm.
this other data source, right? Because in the labor market data, we have this tension between like the surveys of households look more negative, like that's where the unemployment rate is, versus the surveys of establishments. Plus, then like birth death mod, right? So you've got like,
I know,
anyways,
and that's
it's
why I
been
was
kind of
asking about
interesting, but yeah,
yeah.
it's like if you go there, yes. So that is another um that'd be another way to interpret it.
Okay,
So
all right, and I'm trying to avoid geeking out with you on the specific data because I follow it pretty closely, and like in addition to that, the sort of contrary indicators you had there, like the quits rate has now really come back to earth, right? Which is a sign
Mhm.
that yeah, maybe people aren't yet getting fired, but they're now a lot more worried about keeping their jobs, right? Because they believe they quit, they may not get another one, right? So then we could talk about war notices, which is more of a sign of incoming. I mean, there's a lot out there, but rather than bury you in minutia here, let me again sort of reopen the question to, okay, so what do you think is going to happen from here? You know, what is your general economic outlook? Uh, I, I don't want to cede the witness here in any way, but I detect caution from you. So let's start from there. Am I reading you right?
Yeah, I caution for the work we do, caution is appropriate. I mean, I don't want to, I'm a macroeconomist, uh, no, and yet the my baseline, and it was very lonely for quite some time, but I have not had a recession call in at any point in this cycle. I did not think that we needed a recession, nor was it necessary to get inflation down. I think inflation was a huge problem, and much of it has been disruptions related to the pandemic, the war in Ukraine unwinding. And the Fed stepped in and it's played a role, but largely this has been the passage of time and getting some form of normalization. We uh, we are well on our way to normalizing. I mean, I think if you look at inflation is within a half a percentage point of the Fed's target, the PC inflation, and the unemployment rate remains low. We have seen cooling, but we are still, it's not, we still have a strong labor market, which is absolutely central to keeping this going. The consumer household balance sheets. I know people are very angry and feel very beaten down by this cycle, but the reality is for many American households, like they're better off financially than they were before the pandemic, and wages have caught up for many, not all. Like, so we're in a better place than we normally would be heading into a recession. So this has been strong. Business investment looks great. Productivity, uh, which has an ability to productivity is often just the sum of our ignorance, and sometimes our ignorance revises away. Um, so I don't, but like so far, and then there's a story to tell about where things may have become more efficient and there's room. So I think looking forward there, I continue to have a baseline of getting on the glide path. Now, my baseline, well, there's two things. It's both the insurance for this and the risk. Okay, so the piece, we've seen so many different parts of the economy normalize at this point, or move very much back towards something that we could call normal pre-pandemic. The Federal Reserve has not normalized yet. They have not begun to normalize, right? So, and regardless of where we think the federal funds rate that the economy kind of can bear, or not where what it can bear, but like what's like the kind of natural resting place for the federal funds rate, uh, it's below where it's at, right? So there is a the Federal Reserve has a lever to pull to just take a little bit of pressure off, because we've seen a lot of moderating and but we've got to get it to level out, right? Like a 4.1, 4.2% unemployment rate could be totally fine if that's kind of where we hang
Mm-hmm.
out. If it keeps going up, then that dynamic will kick in. Like it's just there's too much stress. So I
Yeah.
think to me, it's like the Fed hasn't started to normalize. They're getting close to it. It's kind of excruciating to watch them uh, not take this step. It's not urgent that they take the step, and I wouldn't want to use the Sahm Rule to say it's urgent. Oh, we're about ready to go into a recession. No, that is not my read of where we are as the economy, and it is also my firm training conviction that as you've made this much progress on inflation, this is a reason to start to normalize, and monetary policy that is not done out of urgency is like the monetary policy we should be aiming for here, right? Because if you have to wait to
Right.
normalize because it's urgent, it's too late. I would never use the Sahm rule to motivate a change in monetary policy. Fiscal policy can work really fast. We
Mhm.
can get money out into consumers' pockets pretty quickly if the government chooses to. And that can have hundreds of billions of dollars sent out all at once, can have some pretty notable effects right away. 25 basis points or even 100 basis points on the federal funds rate in a day won't like it doesn't have the same breadth and speed in terms of its effects on the real economy. The Fed doesn't stop recessions. So like they would need something that's more um, ahead of it. But yeah, so I think that's the thing is I know like I don't know what that quote unquote the neutral federal funds rate is, and yet it does seem as if we have that space to take a little bit of pressure off, and that's what we need at this point, is just a little bit of pressure off to get on that glide path. So that's my baseline, but the longer they wait, the more concerning numbers come in with labor market. The recession risks are elevated. So
Okay. Um, okay. So you haven't changed your baseline, but you're thinking recession risks are elevated, so you got a watchful eye out there. I am incredibly simplifying, so feel free to
okay.
chime in with anything else. But okay, you just keep opening all these doors I want to go through. We're definitely not going to make it through them all in the time we have left. So, Claudia, hopefully we can get you come on the program again at some point in the future to keep digging into this. Um, got a lot of big questions and not a lot of time. Um, okay, so to what you were just talking about there with the Fed, the Fed just if it just takes a little bit off, it's hiked rates so much, it's got altitude now to bring things down. I totally get the logic of what you're saying there. It kind of gives the impression that the Fed is the surgeon, the Fed being able to make really specific changes to create an exact outcome. Where I think most people I've talked to, it is more crude than that. You pull a lever, and it's not a scalpel. The Fed's tool is not a
Mm-hmm.
scalpel. And as you said, not only does monetary policy not go directly into the economy nearly as much as fiscal policy does, but it also acts with a lag, right? And economists, have different ranges, but let's say maybe about a 12-month lag, kind of depending on what it is, right? So even if it does cut rates, now, they announce it tomorrow because the Fed FOMC is meeting right now. It's going to be a while before that 0.25% is really reflected in the economy, right? So, can monetary policy even sort of ride to the rescue in any meaningful way once the Sahm rule's been triggered? I guess not, because you said Feds can't stop recession.
No, yeah, and I am not the Fed is the master of the universe. I truly believe they're given too much credit and blame for what happens, right? But
Okay.
the Fed is an actor in this moment, and the federal funds rate is, I mean, almost 3 percentage points higher than it was before the pandemic.
Yeah.
So if you wanted to point to something that's putting some pressure on the economy, whether it's enough downward pressure, I mean, people argue about Fed should do, whether they should be stepping uh even slowly stepping away with inflation, not quite to 2%. But yeah, they're not the the Fed is certainly, if a recession were to happen or any other kind of crisis, the Fed, one would want the Fed to take, like, they meet the moment, right? If there is what are they calling it now? A significant weakening in the labor market,
Yeah. That's
also
always been
known
done
as
in the
a
past couple. Yeah.
recession, the Sahm rule is not a significant weakening in the labor market, according to the Fed. I would guess. I don't know that for certain, but 4.2% is not going to get them cutting uh, their Fed funds rate. So they would act in that moment. Typically, fiscal policy would be stronger initially before the lags kick in. The recession is not just about day one trying to make it less bad. I mean, the Fed has a role to play. So I'm not saying that it doesn't, eh, like what I push back on is the argument I hear at times with the Fed. 'Cause I mean, I have said multiple times this year the Fed should begin easing policy. Frankly, I think it's a missed opportunity not to ease in July to start the cycle. And there are individuals, and including for some Fed officials, say, well, it's not urgent.
Yeah. Well, we
And
just had
again, I just don't think that is the metric. The Federal Reserve, their job is 2% inflation and low unemployment, maximum unemployment, like the best you can do
yeah.
without stoking inflation. And as far as I'm concerned, if their job is done, they should be getting out of the way. Or we are getting towards that 2%. It is time for them to start removing themselves. They should not be the center of this. The Fed should not have anything to say about, oh, well, GDP growth has been too strong. I mean, they wouldn't say it that way, but it's like, oh, the fact that GDP growth has been strong, well, if that's productivity and we've got inflation 2%, get out of the way, right? Because a high like that's where the economy wants to be. The Fed is about the quote unquote business cycle, smoothing out the disruptions. And we're getting towards the end of our disruptions. Now, the Fed, they sometimes stick around too long and they can be the disruption.
Okay. And so these are big questions that I don't think we have real time to do justice. So feel free to give me your short answer and then we'll
Okay,
just
all right.
earmark them to dig into them. But like on that one, right? Okay, so there are people who can argue, yeah, the Fed stuck around too long and created disruptions by keeping, with ZIRP, right? ZIRP and QE for much longer than it should have, right? So, you mentioned that we probably have an effective federal funds rate that's too high. Now, we probably do, given how indebted the economy is, but it's probably the true level probably isn't really where it was, pre-COVID either, right? And so, there's all sorts of issues about, what is the correct Fed policy, and we could talk forever about that, I'm sure. Now, the Sahm Rule talks about triggering fiscal policy, which I totally get, right? Let me ask this question because I'm sure it's on the minds of a lot of people here, which is like, okay, yep, we can do that, right? Should we? And the should part is, I'm going to make an observation. You don't have to agree with it. But I think there are a lot of people who think, look, the business cycle is a natural business cycle, just like the seasons, of the planet, and winter plays a role. And we should let recessions kind of play out. And it's been, 2.5 decades ago or so, it seems we just decided, no, we don't like winter. We just want it to be economic summer all the time. We're going to keep it at ZIRP. We're going to do QE. We're going to have eternal summer. And then, it deforms things such that when reality finally does exert itself, you get a much bigger downdraft than you otherwise should, right? So I'm not calling the Sahm Rule and your plan into question. I'd love to just explore that in an hour-long conversation. But I guess I'll let you answer unfairly a very short answer to this. But like, how do you think about the should? Right. And of course, a lot of people also say, well, hey, if you go back to fiscal stimulus, checks directly to households, don't you kind of reawaken the inflation dragon at the same time, too? So how do you think through the should?
Yeah, this is so much more complicated than I would have imagined when I put the proposal together in 2019.
Yeah.
Right? Because very much thinking about the Great Recession, thinking about prior, I mean, COVID was unlike anything we have seen. I think the biggest piece for me is this extra supply disruption, right? It's not even, there's a whole set of questions about whether you do the stimulus checks during the pandemic, how big they would be, how targeted. Like, I mean, my thinking there, and as a short answer to this, on, with the next unemployment report, if the Sahm Rule were to trigger and we have would I send out checks? No, not in the broad base check. We're trying to get inflation back down. So I understand there's a level of complexity and this idea of trying to identify when is it appropriate to do policy. That's complicated, and yet it hasn't. I have not given up on having a rule of thumb, whether or not, like, probably these kind of things would probably never actually put on autopilot, but to really have here's a system, here's the program, do we do this, Congress, yes, no, kind of thing. I mean, I still think that that is a reasonable, uh, giving policymakers better fiscal tools. Fiscal policy is very powerful, and sometimes we need power. Like, some of the problems have been relying too much on monetary policy, which has its limitations, right? So we want to do good fiscal. So, but no, this has been a real, yeah, there's so much to learn from this, and I would not send out checks right away on, like, if it were to trigger next, in the next month or two. Um, but this idea of, should we just let a recession run its course? It is really important that recessions cause damage, and they can cause particularly very slow recoveries for, in labor markets. And I think we've seen examples of that. You know, we don't want to keep, fighting the last war. Every recession isn't like the Great Recession, but we don't want to kind of swing back and forth from not doing enough fiscal to doing too much to not doing it. Like, there are lessons, there's something in between. Because I mean, at the end of the day, our most important productive asset are people, our workers, and you want to support that. And recessions can be very hard on certain individuals, certain groups. So
No doubt, and super unfair question for me to ask you to answer
no,
in just like a minute here at the end. So I would love to have you come on and really maybe give you proper time to go through that. One like little tidbit which we can earmark to talk about then is recently Minnesota Fed head Neil Kashkari was interviewed, and he talked about how he was talking to some worker group organizations. I don't know if they were unions or whatever, but he was kind of shocked because the message he got from them was, hey, we would have rather had the recession during COVID than the inflation that we got. In their minds, they were tying the inflation to the stimulus, right? And I've heard you say in this conversation, big question how much of it was due to the supply chain disruptions, but assume for a moment it was driven by the stimulus. They were like, look, we would have rather taken the pain of the recession because, yeah, nobody likes it, but we kind of know how to deal with that. And eventually it'll be over, where inflation is a permanent tax on us, right? And, they basically said, if we had been given the trade-off, right, which in the middle when the world is burning, nothing's that simple. They would have said we would have taken maybe 2 hard years in the labor market versus, losing a big chunk of the purchasing power of our dollar over time. So I'd love when we have more time to discuss things like that with you to get your opinion, because I'm sure as everything is here, it's not just that simple. All right. Well, look, in wrapping up, I've got 2 questions to ask you. The second of which is, where can folks follow you and your work? So I want to make sure I get to that. Real quick before I do, I'm just going to combine all my remaining questions into this last one, which is, Claudia, the world views this video and says, you know what? That Claudia Sahn's really smart. Let's make her the economy czar, and we have to do whatever she tells us to do. Are there any kind of major policy reforms that you would be banging on the table for right now?
Oh, wow, that's a
Yeah.
yeah. I uh, going back to going back to what mentioned earlier on, I think it is so important that before we move out of this moment and into the next crisis, that we really devote time and energy in getting lessons learned. Right? I just, the fiscal policy is so important, and I know it is very contentious what worked, what didn't work, and there's just and in particular thinking about how inflation and supply and how resilient we are. Like, I'm really worried we move on from this, and the next time this comes around, the pandemic was a very unusual cycle, but it's not, we could have other very unusual cycles in the future, and I don't want us to just go right back to square one.
Okay, so sounds like you would sort of issue a national postmortem and like really getting all the data as best we can and really finding out what worked and what didn't, and coming up at least with sort of a playbook for the next time we get metaphorically hit with a 2x4 unawares.
Yes. Yep.
Okay. All right. All right. Well, now to the key question. Claudia, for folks that have really enjoyed this discussion, would like to follow you in your work, where should they go?
So I write regularly at Bloomberg Opinion, and also put post up on LinkedIn, and my Substack. So Stay at Home Macro, play on my last name, Sahm. It's another good place to find some of my writing. And yep.
Great. Do you have a premium Substack?
I do have a paid subscription, but almost all of my writing is for public, right?
Okay.
One of my big things is trying to explain the Fed, bring it to the people. So
Great. Well, we need a lot more of that. I know that stay-at-home macros model is my goal is to make economic policy and macroeconomics better. That's why I wanted to give you
yes.
your chance to make whatever reforms you wanted to make, but also it sounds like you're trying to make it better understood by the general public as well. So, Claudia, when I edit this, I will put up links to those resources, including your Substack here on the screen. Folks, I'll have links in the description below this video there, so you can get there with one click as well. But definitely go sign up for Claudia's free Substack. And if you're, if you're really engaged in this content, like Claudia and I have been here, highly recommend you check out upgrading to her premium Substack as well. All right, Claudia, well, look, I've taken up a lot of your time. I'll ask this last question if you have the time. If you don't, totally
Yeah,
understand.
no, of course. Yep.
Okay, great. So you have had some very big roles. Mentioned you worked at the Fed for a long time. You were on President Obama's Council of Economic Advisors. You have a economic rule named after you. And you are young for somebody with a list of accomplishments that long. What's an important lesson you've learned along that journey that you think is worth sharing with today's viewers?
Don't be afraid to be surprised.
Hmm.
And so I we spent a lot of time talking about the Sahm rule, the recession indicator, that the way it has been useful to people has really surprised me. Like, this has not been a completely comfortable, like, this wasn't supposed to be about, I'm a recession expert. This is not, and I don't know, it's been difficult to kind of navigate being someone who puts that together and has it out there and discusses it, defends it, explains it, and yet, I'm here to be helpful. Like, a lot of times as experts, I'm not, or at least from my experience, I haven't always been able to guess how my expertise was most useful,
Hmm.
right? And I'm not here to, like, I'm here to help other people. And so, while initially when the Sahm Rule got a lot of attention, it was frustrating that it's like, oh, it's going higher. No one's asking me, hey, do we help people with fiscal policy? Why are we doing this about the recession and markets moving? And it's like, no, but people need to understand, like, what are the economic conditions? And it has given me a platform and an opportunity to share more broadly my expertise. So I didn't forecast that one at all. Like, it's not even in the paper where it's introduced. It has no name. It's like it's a little sidebar to the main thing that's about sending out stimulus and the research on payments. And so, yeah, so that's, I think you can't, it's too hard to forecast. And like I say, you just kind of, you go where it takes you. So
Okay. Well, great advice, and I just want to say thank you for doing the work that you do with the mission that you have. Um, I one of the questions I really wanted to get to with you today, we just didn't have enough time to do it justice,
mhm.
was what is your outlook for the U.S. consumer, right? And I've got lots of questions in that, both just sort of in terms of the general economic outlook, but also the
Mhm.
wealth divide that has been growing here. And in many ways, my opinion, one guy
Mhm.
has been an outcome of policy. I don't think a deliberate outcome of policy, but I think a lot of the policies that we've done have just happened to benefit those, particularly with financial assets, right, which are a minority of households, right? Um, So I get the sense from this discussion that the future of the average American household is something that's near and dear to your heart. Helping
Hmm.
sort of democratize financial literacy is a big reason why I created Thoughtful Money. Seems to me that
Hmm.
that's very copacetic with your mission as well. So, anyways, again, very, very appreciative of what you're doing. And again, looking forward very much at some point if we can get you to come back on the program here again, maybe in a couple months, and dive more deeply into some of these other big questions I
Yeah.
just didn't have the chance to give a proper answer
Yeah.
to.
No, no, this is great. Been a great
Uh,
conversation.
well, thank you. Really enjoyed it, Claudia. Thanks so much. Look forward to having you back on the channel soon.
Okay, great. All right. Thank you.
All right. Well, now's the time of the program where we bring in the lead partners from New Harbor Financial, one of the endorsed financial advisory firms by Thoughtful Money, to both share their reaction to what Claudia had to say, but also to give us the latest on what's been going on in the markets over the past week. I'm joined as usual by lead partners Mike Preston and John Loder. Guys, it's great to see you again this week. John, why don't we start with you? What were some of your key takeaways from this discussion with Claudia?
Hi, Adam. Great to be with you again. I got to tell you, I learned some things. So Mike and I and our team here at New Harbor, our real job is that of being market strategists for our clients. We make investment decisions for their capital. So we're very familiar with economic policies and models and kind of approaches. But I can't say it guides our real-time, short-term decision making. In fact, we oftentimes will say that the markets and economy oftentimes become disjointed from one another. There are times where the economy is faltering and the markets couldn't care, and vice versa. So while we take in a lot of different economic perspectives, it sets more of a backdrop of the environment, more so than a timing tool or an outright asset allocation guidepost for us. I will say, we're very familiar with the Sahm Rule, but I learned some things about it today that I didn't know. So, for example, Claudia shared that the impetus for her work that led to this rule was in no small part meant to be a rules-based, a data-driven mechanism to take the politics out of the decision to send stimulus checks, for example, in a recession, which I think is, on the surface, I think we here are all for kind of more rules-based decision making, whether we're talking about fiscal policy or monetary policy. In fact, one of our criticisms of the last 15 years has been the somewhat fly by the seat of the pants apparent decision making that has led to monetary policy. And in fact, the Fed has time and time again violated some of its own rules, like the Taylor rule, for example. They've conveniently put that on and off the shelf to suit perhaps a broader objective. So all big fan for rules-based processes, whether the data is reliable or not. And you did a really good job, Adam, questioning Claudia if the data that goes into the model is suspect, and she, I think, kind of did a very good job kind of expressing the woes of being an economist in this current environment, with things like the data being muddied or dusty, I think was the term you used. But I think it also says a pretty strong statement of where we've come as to what is normal policy. I'm not going to, certainly give a debate here about whether direct stimulus checks is right or wrong, but I think it speaks volumes that the very framework of a very widely adopted rule here was meant to kind of be exactly that, a signal for kind of stimulus check kind of mechanism. Basically saying, hey, we're now in a recession. Send those checks out to make that recession less painful, more kind to folks and real people. But that I think speaks volumes as to the evolution of what is considered normal policy within the toolkit, which 20 years ago would have been just an idea, and a very far-fetched one at that. So, interesting that today is a Fed day. So we have already gotten a decision from the Fed on rate policy at their meeting here today. The press conference by Jerome Powell has yet to happen, but not a whole lot of surprises. A little bit of a change in their messaging and their kind of press release. Basically, and I can pull up here. Perhaps it might be easier just to pull up a statement, a red line version of the statement that I just found quickly on X, Twitter X, you can see here basically not a whole lot of red ink. These are the redlined comparisons to the June meeting. But basically, if you look at all the changes, they more or less speak to a increasing concern on the part of the Fed of the job market picture, the employment picture. So for example, job gains, now their language is moderated versus last month was remain strong. Unemployment rate has moved up versus last month that it was remained low. And here I think is the key. So the Fed's battle for the last many months has been, we got to get inflation under control. Now they have reasserted the other part of their dual mandate. You know, they're attentive to inflation, but both sides of actually says they're going to attend to both sides of the dual mandate. So clearly, they are less concerned about inflation and increasingly concerned about the job picture, which of course is really relevant because that's what goes into the Sahm Rule. So I'll stop there. Certainly, we'll talk more about our take on markets and stuff, but that's, I think, a quick takeaway for that I had on Claudia's comments.
All right, and leave this up just for a second, John.
Oh, sure.
Of course, there goes. But yeah, I think the Fed is really trying to prep everybody, trying to telegraph, I think, as much in advance that rate cuts are coming unless something dramatically changes. And, you know, Powell has talked for the past several press conferences about, well, in recent interviews about, hey, he's finally seeing the disinflation that he wants to see that gives him confidence they're going to get to their 2% inflation objective. And in previous press conferences, when asked, hey, you know, Powell, you're saying you're not going to move until the data tells you, what's one of the things besides getting to 2% inflation that would get you to cut rates? And he's started saying, well, weakness in the labor market. And they're not saying the labor market is weak here, but they are, you know, they're moderating the language used to describe the jobs market, where up until now it's been strong. And as you said, their focus has been primarily on inflation. They've now actually, in the second paragraph here, last line, they've crossed out inflation and are basically saying, okay, we're back squarely to worrying equally about inflation and jobs. So I think this is really, you know, Powell trying to say, hey, things are getting back to normal. And of course, he's said, as soon as we feel like we're going to hit 2% inflation, that's when we're going to start cutting rates and or get more worried about the jobs market. So I think he's giving himself lots of room there for when he does decide to cut, whether it's in September or afterwards. He'll be able to say, hey, inflation is close enough to 2, and or the unemployment rate's now moving in a direction that's got us concerned, where neither of those two things should surprise the market, because that's what he's been out here telegraphing. Okay. Yeah, I you know, took away from talking to Claudia that, like, yeah, it's got to be hard to be an economist, especially sort of a one that's, you know, is quoted as often in the mainstream as she is right now, because there's just so much uncertainty kind of everywhere in terms of, you know, where things could go on a macro sense, but also not having full trust in the data that you're looking at, especially around unemployment, which is what the Sahm Rule is triggered by. You know, she did say, look, my baseline still isn't recession, but I think the risk of recession is, I don't think she used this exact words, but, you know, uncomfortably high enough that I'm watching, you know, my rule really closely, and it would not surprise me if we tip into recession here, even though that's not yet quite her base case. But I certainly detected from her, you know, a pretty decent aura just of concern of where things are headed. And like I said, if they started to slide into recession, I don't get the sense that Claudia would be very surprised by that. All right, Mike, look, anything else you want to add to John's recap of Claudia before we move into what the market's been doing?
Not really too much. I think that you and John did a very good job. But, you know, I did like that Claudia said that she hopes that we learn the lessons of the past, you know, that she's fearful that the other side of all of this is going to be painful, or the reckoning is going to be painful. I've got no doubt that that's the case, you know, and I'm all for a rules-based system as well. And she, you know, she talked about this rule attempts to instill some discipline, some fiscal discipline, so that there's some rules-based way to provide stimulus checks. Well, you know, I guess I'd say, and this would probably border on a political discussion, but I think I'd say, having the go-to be stimulus checks or some kind of stimulus immediately is part of the problem. And that part of it, I'm not sure that I would like to see in the future. It's not to say that sometimes we don't need some help, all of us, but still, I think that we have this go-to, this easy button that we keep pushing, the stimulus, and it's likely to be the same way in the next crisis. Hopefully, and I do think that next crisis is coming. Hopefully, the Sahm rule is in place and the legislators use it with some amount of discipline. I don't think all of that's in place yet based on her talk, but anyway, I think that she's made a very good attempt, and for that, I really admire her.
Thanks. Hey, let me just interject real quickly on here. So obviously that was the big question. I said I'd love to really delve into you next time you come on, Claudia, which is sort of like the should we do this? And and she didn't. It was just right at the very end of the conversation, so she did not. In fairness to her, she did not have a lot of time to give much clarity on this. But what I kind of took away from her was, hey, when she developed this, it was pre-COVID, and seeing sort of how the stimulus response got abused, my words, not hers. I'm guessing that she has maybe a different opinion about how the Sahm rule should be used post-COVID than she did pre-COVID. I guess one thing I want to give her credit for, and I think I'm more like you, Mike, where I feel like too much intervention has created a lot of the chronic issues, the big chronic issues we have right now. So I'm not a huge fan of it. But I think part of her intent in developing the Sahm rule was a trigger so that very targeted stimulus could be done early on, and it be limited versus letting the recession get to a point where things metastasize, where all of a sudden the central planners are having to ride to some gigantic rescue and are then making decisions in a panic. And that's where you get these really crazy, large, outsized responses on the policy side. So I think her whole intent at the beginning was try to avoid getting to that stage, which is something I can applaud. So anyway, sorry for the interjection. I'll let you pick it back up.
Yeah, no, I think that's idealistic. If that could happen, it seems to me to go against human nature. Human nature is, try a little bit of this. If it doesn't work, try a little bit of more. And then if you keep getting a bad effect or a waterfall decline, well, just go all in. I think that based on what we have learned so far about monetary stimulus, fiscal stimulus, we're probably likely to overdo it early. And yeah, it would be great in an ideal world if this kind of model could limit that. I doubt it, but we'll see. We can have hope.
Okay. Well, like I said, I'm going to have her back on at some point to dig into this in depth, and so we can hear that answer and then respond to it then.
Well, good. Yeah, and well, thank you. Yeah, we'd like to talk a little bit about some recent portfolio updates as well, Adam. If we could pivot to that, I don't know if you had any more you wanted to talk about.
No. That's great. So I was going to ask that because last week we were talking about how the market had started correcting. In fact, we'd seen some pretty big drops in some of the Magnificent Seven stocks. I don't have the stats off the top of my head, but I think the Magnificent Seven stocks themselves from top to today have probably lost well over $1 trillion, maybe even trillions in market cap at this point. Now we've had some sort of bounce in the market. So I guess the big question I was hoping to ask you is the sell-off over, or is this, kind of like a head fake bounce and you expect lower prices in the near term?
Yeah, Adam, your viewers know that we're not super bullish, particularly because of the backdrop of completely overvalued markets, valuations that we've really never before seen at these levels. And yet, if we had to guess, and we do have to guess as part of our job based on data and experience, we have to guess what the very next step is likely to be. If we had to guess, we'd say the market probably goes a little bit higher. We had a 5% pullback on the S&P. I'll share some charts as we're talking about this, Adam. I'll bring them up here. So taking a look at the S&P 500 on a daily chart, we had almost exactly a 5% pullback from top to bottom. Now, this was very mild pullback, but it was persistent and it was very concentrated in the Mag 7 stocks that you just mentioned. Take a look at the NASDAQ. The NASDAQ had about a 10% pullback. So the NASDAQ had a 10% pullback, traded 4 or 5 days below the 50-day moving average. That is this red line. I'm going to go back to the S&P and focus on that for a minute. The S&P 500 had a relatively perfect bounce off the 50-day moving average so far. Down here in New Harbor's model, we maintain protection down at this 5,200 level. We view that as key technical support, the prior breakout. If we go higher, and we think we likely will from here, we will end up moving up that hedge point. We might move it as high as 5,400 or something like that. It depends. If we get a nice strong move, we'll probably be able to move it all the way up to there. But so we saw a concentrated decline. Some names were down 20-something%. I think NVIDIA was down 20-something%. It went from 140 to 105. That's 30-ish%, 30-something%. So losing almost a third of its value in just a month and a half's time is quite a lot. Now we've just had a bounce from 103 to 115. That's a 12% bounce just today, as we're talking about, and about 14% off the low. And so you can see this trend line that I've drawn in here. A number of charts look just like this. There's some big earnings still yet this week. I think it's Meta tonight, and if I'm not mistaken, maybe Apple on Thursday, if I remember correctly. And so I think, based on our everything we look at, including our short-term indicators, it's our best guess that we move a little bit higher. And so we actually upped our equity allocation today. And as you know from our years of talking together, and particularly in the last months and year or so, we're quite cautious based on valuations. So we only went from about 36 or 37% on average because we recently stopped out of one position, that being uranium. We got out of uranium where we had a 2.5% position. That dropped us to around 36 or 37%, or just under that. And we just added a few percent mid-cap stocks. So taking a look at participation or what's really driving things, just a couple quick numbers. The NASDAQ has actually been, and this is the last day of the month for July, NASDAQ's actually down 3 or 4%, yet the S&P equal weight is up 4%. Mid caps are up 3 or 4%. So the market has really started to broaden out a few weeks ago, almost a month ago, and it's continuing. That's not to say the NASDAQ won't also go up if the market reverses up from here, but there are some signs that the baton has been passed to other players in the market, both equal weight, S&P, and mid caps. So today we added a piece of mid caps. We will add another piece, I think, in the coming days if we get some follow through. So we'll add about 5% mid-cap stock exposure, pushing us up into the low 41, 42%, something like that. This is still a very conservative position. We still have our hedges in place, but we think the market's likely to run for a month or two. That is our best prediction. Be careful about predictions about the future because they're uncertain, but that is our best prediction, and we bumped up our equity exposure a little bit because of it.
Okay. And maybe John, I'll come to you with this question. So, we're seeing the markets sort of stabilize here, is bouncing. Mike seems to think that this bounce will continue for long enough that you guys are, entering here on the long side. I want to talk for a second about bonds. Looking at a 3-month chart of the U.S. Treasury 10-year, we've basically gone down from about a yield of 4.7% around 3 months ago to today. We're down at about 4.13, something like that, but pretty close to 4.1. So bond prices have been on the rise. I know that you guys have largely sort of been expecting this in the near term. True. And are you guys making any changes to your portfolio right now, or just letting things play out?
Yeah, happy to talk about that, Adam. I want to share a couple of charts here. First, I want to elaborate a little bit more on what Mike spoke about there with the broadening of the market. Let me just find my chart here that I want to share. Bear with me here. Let's see here. Got a couple different windows open. So here we go. So we talked about, we look at a lot of different technical indicators as measuring breadth. There's many different ways to measure breadth and momentum. We look at a bunch of different ones, and it's kind of the movement of those indicators together that the uniformity across those things as to the strength of the signal, if you will. And rewind the tapes about a month or so, and we were seeing those breadth indicators deteriorating quite dramatically across the board. So that got us more cautious. Then in a literally like a 2-day period, we had this, sudden shift from large cap tech stocks to Russell 2000, mid cap stocks, for example. And that was enough to dramatically change those metrics across the board. Now, we did have a brief pullback in that initial move, but so far this seems to be sticking. So I'll show you a chart here that I think kind of will illuminate a little bit what we're looking at. This is what's called a relative strength chart, and it's a slow chart in that it's meant to kind of tune out a lot of the noise. And you can see along the x-axis, this is what's called a point and figure chart, and point and figure charts basically express moves in columns of X's and O's. X's are moves higher, O's are moves lower. And what this shows is the relative strength of IWM, the Russell 2000 ETF, versus SPY, which is the cap-weighted S&P ETF. And you can see here, just this month, we finally have seen a relative strength reversal here, where the Russell 2000 has outpaced on a relative strength basis the S&P 500. Now, we can get really wonky here. This is on a 3.25 box reversal. It's meant to really kind of tune out some of the short-term noise and look at more durable moves. But you have to go back to 2020 to see a move like this that has registered in a relative strength buy signal or reversal as strong as we've seen. So this is pretty material change that has certainly caught our attention, and we think it's the real deal, even if it's a short type of move, because a short term, because we do think ultimately there will be downside of this market, and we think we're probably closer to that than further away from it. But that's that. Interesting on you asked about the bond market. I want to show you a chart here just to show how yields have moved over the last month. So bear with me. I'm just going to load a website here, because it's been a very non-uniform move in the yield curve. In fact, what we've seen is what you might call a bull steepening. Okay, so here is a publicly available website. I'll share that people at home can choose to. You got to suffer through some ads and whatnot. But so this shows the yield curve as of yesterday. Okay, and this is along the x-axis. You have 1 month, 2 month, all the way out to 30 years. If we go back and, for example, look at that as compared to even just the beginning of this month, you can pin the current chart and go back to July 1st as an example. And so what you see here is the July 1st is the red line. You can see yields have pulled back, come back pretty dramatically along the whole yield curve, but especially in the belly, what we call the belly of the curve, the 2 to 10 year, 3 to 10 year type of range. So the yield curve has come off much less on the long run. So that's why, for example, even though the 10-year yield has tagged recent lows, things like TLT, which hold longer term bonds, haven't rallied as much as they would have the last time yields were this low, because the long end of the curve hasn't softened. We've seen this yield curve shift higher through what's called a bull steepening. And in fact, we've had some degree of uninversion. You can see the 30-year right here is now above the 2-year. There was a point last week where the 10-year was, I think, within 12 or 13 basis points of uninverting relative to the 2-year. So we've definitely seen some very dramatic moves in the yield curve that I think speaks to a couple of things. The expectation that the Fed is going to drop rates in the fairly near future. Obviously not at the July meeting at this point, because they've just announced that they're keeping things put. Very low market perceived probability that was going to happen anyways. But by the September meeting, there's essentially a 0% chance priced in the market that the Fed won't drop at least 25 basis points. But on the long end, you have a number of different things. You've got still really troublesome fiscal deficit situation. You've had what some economists have called activist treasury issuance, where much of the deficit over the last bunch of months or years has been funded through the issuance of an outsized number or amount of short-term treasury bills and not longer-term coupons. And that has essentially kept the long end of the curve somewhat suppressed compared to what it otherwise it would have been in terms of interest rates. There's I think a belief that that's going to have to shift more towards away bills and towards coupon issuance. So that's kind of a little bit of a perfect storm for keeping a lid on possibly longer term rates. So pretty I think a nuanced bond market right now. We've seen it play out over the last month.
Okay, but things are beginning to get interesting. Those who have had long positions on the longer duration side are now beginning to see some gains on that side. John, the chart you just showed, is the 230 yield curve now officially uninverted?
It is, Adam, and I apologize if I didn't share my chart. I thought I did, but did I share this
No,
chart?
you did. I'm just trying to make
Yeah.
sure I was looking at it right.
Yeah, so you look right here, the 30 right here is at, let's call it 4.4. The 2 is at, and this is as of yesterday, just under 4.4. So it is slightly uninverted, the 230, the 2-year versus the 30-year. But the 2-year right here versus the 10 is still inverted a bit. And it got as close as, I think, about 12 or 13 basis points in recent days of uninverting. Because the 2-year yields have dropped so much on the expectation of Fed rate policy reductions in the coming months.
Okay, and the reason why I want to shine a bright light on that, as many folks on this channel have said, is it's actually not we talk about inverted yield curves being a precursor to recession, which they are, but it's not really the inversion that precedes the recession. It's the uninversion of the curve. So the fact that we're starting to see some uninversion right now, we'll see we'll track this closely over the next couple of weeks to see if this is a persisting trend and if we see more of the other yield curves starting to uninvert as well. But this is catching my attention. John, is it catching yours too?
Yeah, it very much is, Adam. That is one of the classic signs of a kind of impending recession. Just like the unemployment rate tends to not do much of anything until, and you talked about it with your interview with Claudia. Traditionally you'll see the unemployment rate start to kind of drift a little higher and then shoot automatically, suddenly quite higher during recessions. Same kind of thing with the uninversion of a yield curve. You see the same kind of thing. You see it narrowing, but it's the uninversion that typically is kind of the real harbinger of the onset of recession or imminent onset of recession.
Okay. Well, guys, I got to start wrapping things up here. Michael, I'll go back to you real briefly for any comments you want to make about the precious metals and the miners, because I think we've seen some positive action there of late. And then, John, I'll come back to you for the closing point.
Sure. Let's take a quick look at silver and gold. Both have been in a bit of a pullback over the last month and a half. However, I think that the trend is still bullish, and I'll just go to the charts here. Here's a chart of silver, just using ETFs here as a proxy. It shows up easier on our charting package. But here's silver, peaked back on May 20th. So here we are. That's actually a 2-month consolidation. The spot price of silver was $32.50 here, so just a little bit higher than what you see on this ETF. And we're down around 28 or so right now. So to me, this looks still like a bullish breakout and a flag consolidation. This is a weekly chart, and I have basically drawn these lines in here. I'm expecting that this is a normal pullback, and it's going to back from 30 to 25. Shoot, that's that's a 15% pullback, right? So that feels like a lot. I do believe we're going higher, and I do believe silver next stop is 34 to 35 based on the charts that we look at. Here we are at 28 or maybe a little high, 29 almost today. So that's a pretty big move. And so I think that's going to happen relatively soon if gold does what we think it will do. Here's gold. Just taking a look at this ETF as a proxy on a daily chart. Had this consolidation, broke out, made a relative new high on this ETF, although gold has not made an all-time high yet. We think that gold is going to go through 2,500 pretty quickly. Now that we've had a pullback that's now moving up, it's quite likely that we get this breakout pretty soon. And that should drag silver up too. Going to the weekly chart, you can see it a little bit better, this big triangle consolidation. And this has been tough here for another 2 months or 6 weeks, like I said earlier. But overall, it's bullish, and we're knocking right on the door at the all-time high. Big picture on gold looks even more bullish than silver. Here's a 20-year chart. We've been showing this over and over again. This back here was a major signal. This breakout a few months ago. I guess this is back in March. And so gold has gone from 2,000 right up to 2,400 or so. We think next stop 2,500 plus. And then the range for gold should be 2,500 to 3,000. Lastly, take a look at gold stocks. You can look at an index. You can look at an ETF like this. It doesn't matter. Gold stocks have certainly underperformed. There's been a lot of concerns about them, about increased cost of production, increased inflation, increased government intervention. But truthfully, if we're right on gold and silver, these stocks should go up no matter what. It looks a little bit like an inverse head and shoulders pattern on the monthly chart. We're looking for GDX, for example, to get up into the low 40s here near term. That might be a pause/consolidation place. It might let us rebalance our positions and or change our hedges. But that's what we think. And then long term, I don't see any reason why we don't go 50, 55 on this index if gold goes to the 2,500 to 3,000 range that we talk about. So consistently bullish here, I know, but yeah, I think it's a good that you brought it up, Adam, because we just went through a 2-month pause where a lot of gold and silver bulls have been kind of tired, and probably even myself thinking this if I admit it from time to time, like, well, is that it? Is it over? The gold and silver bulls have been long suffering here for a long time, particularly mining stock bulls, and they're very quickly pessimistic. That's a good thing. I think this 2-month consolidation is the pause that refreshes, and I think we're starting to see them move higher out of that consolidation.
All right. And real quick, Mike, are you guys in watch mode right now, or are you actually making any portfolio allocation changes as a result of what's going on?
For the gold and silver miners, we've allowed the weighting to get a little bit higher than our standard 10% weighting as it's moved higher. We will, if we get that move up into the 40s, lower 40s, we might very well take some profits and rebalance back to model weight. We may change our hedges, but we have no plans to change our gold silver mining allocation at this time. As I mentioned earlier, we did stop out of uranium. That position was URA. It went through a technical stop. We took that stop, but just today we added back some mid-cap exposure. And then we'll be doing some more in the coming days to add a total of 5% there. We did have roughly half of that today, 2.5%. Bonds are looking a lot better. TLT is acting well, up at 95. We think that breaks higher, and we've got some hedges there. But other than that, there's been no other major changes really in the last few days or week that I can think of. And we're always happy to share with you and your viewers.
Yeah, and we have you on every week. So as eventually you start making more changes, you'll just let us know. All right. Well, look, I got to wrap it up here. Folks, if you'd like to see Claudia come back on to dig more deeply into some of those really big questions that I raised right there at the end of the discussion with her, please let us know by hitting the like button and then clicking on the red subscribe button below, as well as that little bell icon right next to it. And I'll just make my normal call here for most viewers, which is trying to navigate this increasingly confusing future that we're heading into, both in the economy and in the markets. I highly recommend that most people, unless you have a really good and long track record of being a successful DIY investor, work under the guidance of a good financial advisor who takes into account all the issues that Claudia and I and Mike, John, and I have discussed here in this video. If you've got a good one who's doing that for you, great, stick with them. But if you don't, or even if you'd like just a second opinion from one who does, maybe even John and Mike and their team there at New Harbor Financial, just fill out the short form over at thoughtfulmoney.com. Have a free consultation with these guys. They don't cost anything. There's no commitment to work with them. It's just a free public service that these guys offer to help as many people as possible, position as prudently as possible for what may be coming. While you're over there at Thoughtful Money too, don't forget, if you haven't already, to click the newsletter link at the top of the site and sign up for our free newsletter. John, as we wrap up here, I know that you guys have seen a bit of a surge in people knocking on your door over the past couple of weeks who've kind of gotten a bit jittery with the relatively small sell-off that the market's had. I feel like that's one of the things you start to see near turning points of the market where people who have been very complacent or haven't been paying attention, you have a little bit of a correction in the market, and then all of a sudden you get sort of this outsized response of people being nervous. And to me, that's a sign that many people are actually feeling pretty vulnerable about their or have a lack of confidence in the system going forward. And they love to not have to think about it, but then when bad news or they look at their portfolio and see some losses, it jolts them out of their complacency, and all of a sudden they're kind of saying, hey, maybe I should be doing something here. I think people should really honor that emotion and use that as a compulsion to make sure that they get to a point where they can sleep well at night. I know you guys know that when things really start moving, when you get a lot of downside volatility in the market, then you guys start to get flooded with people in a panic, right? And almost kind of like the Sahm Rule, I want people to use this recent little jolt of worry as the early warning trigger to get their affairs in order, so that they're not part of that panic, desperate, wave coming perhaps later on, where your options are much more limited and they're much less good than they are when you do it when things are still going pretty well. So anything you want to say about that before we wrap up?
Yeah, Adam, we've been fortunate. We have seen an uptick in people reaching out to us, many of whom find us through your channel. We're very grateful for that. And we're always really happy to have conversations with folks we're here we just want to help people. Ultimately, if they become a client, great, but that's going to be because they have determined that we're a good fit for what they're looking for. But we can spend a half hour or so with someone and add some value just in helping them. That's a high point of our day. We love doing that. And I will say there has been a flurry of folks that have, I think, been a little spooked by the, much of the last year, the complacency was built on, these AI mega cap stocks can do no wrong. The market's going up forever. And now we've just seen a whiff of the sentiment and the headlines changing a little bit. And that's enough to rattle some of the people's nerves, right? So we've had a lot of conversations with folks that feel it in their bones that they should get more defensive, but they're stuck. And the simple, everybody's familiar with the motto, buy low, sell high. Sounds really simple, right? It is impossibly hard for humans to do that because of emotions and the things that are going on in the moment with markets and the news that make it so impossible to do that. And you don't have to treat that as a black and white kind of mandate. Frankly, there are degrees of defensiveness. And we oftentimes will have customized conversations with folks who have, for example, very highly appreciated stock that they want to, protect the gains, but they don't want to have the tax impacts. That's where we can bring hedging tools to the table. We can explain to them the pros and cons. There's no free lunch with hedging or anything in life. There's always some trade-off, but we can help them get to a point of comfort with what their comfort level is, and kind of have it, at a level that feels right for them. But yeah, these are the kind of conversations we've seen an uptick in recently, and we're very privileged to be able to have those kinds of conversations.
All right, great. We'll have to end it there, but yes, unless you're already feeling, bulletproof about your current allocation, I highly recommend that you give a call to your professional financial advisor, or if you don't have a good one in place, find a good one to talk to, and certainly talking to some of the ones here that Thoughtful Money makes available to you is a good starting point. All right, John and Mike, another great week. Thanks so much. Look forward to seeing you guys here next week, giving us the latest updates. We can then talk next week. We can deconstruct Powell's press conference, which I'm sure we're going to go watch now. So we'll actually have the results of that when we hop on next week. So looking forward to hearing your guys' interpretation of it. But thanks so much for hanging with me for yet another week. Everybody else, thanks so much for watching.
Thank you so much, Adam. See you soon.
Goodbye for now, Adam. Thanks.